The stars stretched out before Commander Grace Wilson like an endless ocean, their light shining down on Earth's fleet as they moved through the cold expanse of space. It was a peaceful sight, one that had always filled her with a sense of awe and wonder. But today, that peace was shattered. The quiet hum of the fleet's engines was drowned out by the uneasy tension that gripped her chest. The Galaxy Council had issued a warning about humanity. A warning that some of the galaxy's oldest and most powerful species feared humanity's unpredictable nature. They saw humans as dangerous, too chaotic, too aggressive, and too quick to adapt. And in their wisdom, the Council urged the rest of the galaxy to stay away from Earth, to avoid interacting with the humans, to keep them isolated. Grace had fought long and hard to prove humanity's worth. She fought for Earth's survival, for a place in the galaxy. She knew her people weren't perfect, but they weren't the monsters the Council feared either. Humanity wasn't a species of conquerors. They were survivors, and if the galaxy didn't learn that soon, there would be consequences. The comms crackled to life. "Commander Wilson, we've received a transmission from the HFY Dominion." Lieutenant Sharp's voice rang out over the line. "They've responded to our request for a meeting." Grace's heart skipped a beat. The HFY were one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy, and securing an alliance with them could be humanity's first step toward proving themselves. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about showing the galaxy that humanity could stand side by side with the other species. "Patch it through," Grace replied, her voice steady but her mind racing. The screen in front of her flickered, and a figure appeared. A tall, imposing figure in dark armor. The HFY representative stared at her with glowing, alien eyes. "Commander Wilson," the HFY's voice was low and cold. "You humans continue to ignore the warnings from the Galaxy Council. You bring chaos wherever you go. Your species is unpredictable, dangerous." Grace's hand tightened around the armrest of her chair, but she kept her voice calm. "We're not the threat you think we are. We've fought our way to where we are now. We didn't just survive, we adapted. We've learned from our mistakes. We don't want to bring chaos, we want peace." The HFY's expression remained unreadable, but the disdain in his eyes was clear. "Your survival instincts make you a dangerous wildcard, Commander. There is no place for chaos in this galaxy. The Council's warning is clear. I strongly suggest you reconsider your place among the stars." The transmission ended abruptly, and Grace was left staring at the blank screen. Her breath was heavy, the weight of the conversation pressing down on her. The Council's warning wasn't just a suggestion, it was a threat. The HFY had dismissed humanity, and with them, the entire galaxy had begun to look at Earth as a ticking time bomb. Grace stood up and walked over to the viewport. Outside, the stars continued to shine, unaffected by the tension that had taken root inside the fleet. Humanity's future was on the line, and the galaxy was watching, waiting for them to make their next move. "Commander," Lieutenant Sharp called, walking into the room, "we've received word from the Council. They're calling for a meeting. They want to discuss the next steps with Earth's leadership." Grace's eyes narrowed. The Council wanted to discuss humanity's future. They hadn't even given them a chance to prove themselves. The warning had been ignored by the HFY, but Grace knew that wasn't the end of it. There were other species watching, others who had already made up their minds about humans. She turned to Sharp, her jaw clenched. "Get the fleet ready. We're going to prove them wrong." The next few days were filled with meetings, strategizing, and preparing for the next step. Earth's fleet was growing stronger, but it was still outmatched by the older, more established empires. They needed allies. They needed the galaxy to see humanity's potential. But no matter how hard they tried, every new contact was met with distrust, every move calculated as a potential threat. And then came the attack. It wasn't unexpected. Grace had known that this would come eventually, that the warnings about humanity would lead to conflict. But when it happened, it still struck with the force of a hammer. A coalition of alien ships, led by the Khuzar Empire, arrived at Earth's border, demanding humanity's immediate surrender. They were the first to act on the Council's warning, directly targeting Earth's outer colonies. The Khuzar were ruthless, calculating. They were not here to negotiate. They were here to wipe humanity out before they became a true threat. "All hands to battle stations," Grace ordered, her voice steady despite the fear rising in her chest. "We've got a fight on our hands." She could feel the weight of the moment. Humanity was about to face their greatest test. Would they survive, or would the galaxy's fears prove true? "Commander, we're outmatched," Sharp said, her face pale as the warning lights flashed across the bridge. "We need reinforcements." "We don't have reinforcements," Grace replied, her gaze unwavering as she turned to face her crew. "We fight with what we have. We survive. We adapt. That's what we do." The battle had begun. Commander Grace Wilson stood at the helm of the Endurance, Earth's flagship, her hands gripping the control panel as the ship shook violently from enemy fire. The Khuzar fleet had arrived without warning, a massive wave of warships that seemed to swallow the stars around them. The Khuzar were a terrifying force, ancient, brutal, and unrelenting. They had always been a threat, but now they were here and they were targeting Earth's colonies. "Damage report," Grace shouted over the blaring alarms that filled the bridge. She could feel the fear and tension radiating through her crew, but she knew she couldn't let it show. The future of humanity depended on their ability to stay calm and focused. "Shields are down to 45%, Commander," Lieutenant Sharp called out, her voice tight with urgency. "Multiple hits on the outer hull. We've lost contact with 3 of the outer colonies." Grace's heart sank. They were outmatched. The Khuzar's ships were massive, their weapons capable of obliterating anything in their path. Earth's fleet, though stronger than it had been, was still no match for them. "Divert all power to shields," Grace ordered. "Get us into the asteroid field. We'll use the terrain to our advantage." The Endurance veered sharply, plunging into the dense asteroid belt that surrounded Earth's outer system. It was their only chance. The Khuzar's superior firepower made direct combat a losing battle, but in the asteroids their size would be their weakness. Grace wasn't sure they could survive long, but they could buy time. "All ships follow my lead," she called to the fleet, her voice filled with determination. "We'll fight them in the shadows, hit them fast, and then retreat into the field." The fleet scattered, diving in different directions. The Khuzar ships followed them, but their size made maneuvering difficult. Grace's plan was working, so far. The Endurance weaved through the asteroids, taking sharp turns and firing at the smaller Khuzar ships whenever the opportunity arose. Every shot from the Endurance was aimed for weak points: engines, weapons, shields. The humans had learned to be resourceful, and their adaptability made them unpredictable. They couldn't match the Khuzar in firepower, but they could outsmart them. "Target their engines," Grace ordered as another Khuzar ship loomed large on their sensors. "Take out their ability to chase us." The Endurance fired, its weapons hitting the Khuzar ship's main engine, sending it into a tailspin. For a moment, Grace felt a flicker of hope. The Khuzar weren't invincible. They could be beaten. But then the full force of the Khuzar fleet arrived. Out of nowhere, a massive Khuzar dreadnought dropped from behind a nearby asteroid, its weapons charging. The Endurance was directly in its sights. "Brace for impact," Grace yelled, slamming her fist down on the armrest. The ship lurched violently as the dreadnought's first blast struck them, throwing everyone on the bridge forward. Sparks flew from the consoles and the lights flickered. The Endurance was reeling from the blow. "Shields are failing," Sharp shouted, trying to regain control of the ship. "Hull integrity at 30%. We're losing power." Grace's mind raced. She had to think fast. The Khuzar had underestimated them so far, but this was no longer a fight they could win with tactics alone. They needed to turn the tide, or humanity would be lost. "Lieutenant Sharp, prepare to launch the auxiliary fighters." "We're going in closer," Grace ordered, her voice steady even though her stomach twisted with fear. "We'll disable their weapon systems with our last strike. All ships follow my lead. We'll take the fight to them." The crew scrambled to execute the order. Grace could hear the rapid beeping of the warning lights, the sounds of chaos in the background, but she blocked it all out. The Endurance wasn't just a ship, it was humanity's hope, its symbol of defiance against the galaxy that wanted to destroy them. She was going to make them see, make them understand that humans weren't just going to roll over. "Launching fighters," Sharp called. "They're ready for battle." Grace felt a surge of pride. Humanity had never backed down from a fight, and today wouldn't be the day they started. As the small fighter ships launched from the Endurance, Grace's heart thudded in her chest. The fighters were quick and agile, their small size making them perfect for the asteroid field. They swarmed the Khuzar dreadnought like wasps, darting in and out of its massive guns' range, harassing the larger ship and slowly wearing it down. The Khuzar, unable to hit the agile fighters, turned their attention to the Endurance once more, but Grace had a plan. With the fighters distracting the dreadnought, she led the Endurance in a bold maneuver, darting under the larger ship's weapons and launching one final, devastating strike at the dreadnought's core. The impact was enormous. The dreadnought's shields failed, and a cascade of explosions rocked the enemy ship. For a moment, everything stood still. The Khuzar fleet hesitated. The humans had done it. They had struck a blow that had crippled the strongest of the enemy's ships. But Grace knew this wasn't over. The Khuzar would be back, and next time they might not be so careless. "We've won this battle," Grace said, her voice full of exhaustion and triumph. "But the war is far from over. Prepare for the next fight." As the Endurance floated in the wreckage of the battlefield, the crew allowed themselves a brief moment of victory. But Grace couldn't forget what the Khuzar had done. They would come for Earth again. And this time, humanity would be ready. The aftermath of the battle left the space around Earth littered with the twisted remnants of alien ships. The Endurance hung in the void, battered but still intact. Grace Wilson stood on the bridge, staring out at the wreckage. Her ship had survived, but the cost had been high. They had struck a major blow against the Khuzar fleet, but Grace knew the victory was only temporary. The Khuzar wouldn't give up so easily. They'd come back stronger, more prepared. "Damage report," Grace said, her voice heavy with exhaustion. "Shields are down to 25%, Commander," Lieutenant Sharp replied, her eyes glued to the control panel. "Hull integrity is holding at 40%, but we've lost 3 of our fighter squads. Casualties are high." Grace closed her eyes for a brief moment, the weight of the loss pressing down on her. The victory had come at a cost, but it was the only option. They had to survive. Earth had to survive. She couldn't let the sacrifices be in vain. "Set course for the nearest station," Grace ordered, her voice steady. "We need to regroup, repair, and prepare for what's next." The crew moved quickly, the efficiency born of months of war and training. Despite the exhaustion in their eyes, they worked as if the battle was still raging. Grace walked down the hallway, her mind spinning. The Khuzar were formidable, but humanity had shown them something they hadn't expected: resilience. The question now was, could they keep this up? As she entered her quarters, her eyes landed on the communications console. A message had come through, one from the Galaxy Council. The Council had been watching Earth's struggle with growing concern. The warning they had given about humanity was meant to be a protection, a way to control the chaos. But Grace knew better. The Council had underestimated humanity, will to survive. She activated the transmission, and a familiar face appeared on the screen: General Talloner of the CHR Dominion. The CHR had been watching the battle closely. Their silence had been deafening after the attack, but now they were reaching out. "Commander Wilson," Talloner's deep voice rumbled through the comms, "we've seen what your people are capable of. The Khuzar have underestimated you, but we have seen the truth. Your species is dangerous, but in the right hands that danger can be an asset. We are prepared to offer our support." Grace's heart skipped a beat. This was what they had been fighting for, to prove humanity wasn't just a threat, but a force for good. The HFY Dominion was one of the most powerful empires in the galaxy, and an alliance with them would change everything. "I won't lie to you, General," Grace said, her voice steady despite the surge of emotion. "We don't want to be seen as a threat. We want peace, but we'll fight if we have to. Earth's future depends on it." Talonar's eyes, glowing with a strange inner light, studied her carefully. "The HFY will stand with you, Commander Wilson. But remember this, what you've done is only the beginning. The galaxy watches, and the QZR will not be the only ones testing your species. You've proven you can survive. Now prove you can lead." Grace nodded, understanding the weight of Talonar's words. "We'll prove it." In the days that followed, Earth's fleet regrouped at a nearby space station, patching up their ships and preparing for the next phase of the war. Grace knew this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. The HFY's offer of support was a victory, but they needed more than just firepower. They needed unity. They needed to show the galaxy that humanity wasn't just a species that fought to survive. They fought for something greater, a future. As Grace walked through the shipyards, she could see the determination in her crew's eyes. They had already started working on new strategies, repairing their fleet and preparing for the battles that were sure to come. Humanity had survived the first wave, but Grace knew they couldn't rest yet. The QZR were still out there, and they would come again. And this time, humanity would be ready. "Commander," Sharp called out, hurrying toward her. "We've received word from the HFY. They've offered to send reinforcements, ships, weapons, and most importantly, their tactical support. But there's a catch." Grace raised an eyebrow. "A catch?" "They're asking us to make an official pact," Sharp continued. "A military alliance. They want us to fight with them against other factions in the galaxy. This could be our chance to prove we're not just a threat, we could become a powerful ally. But it means committing to something bigger than Earth." Grace took a deep breath. The decision wasn't easy. She had never wanted Earth to be dragged into a galactic war, but the reality was clear. The galaxy wasn't waiting for them to catch up. The galaxy was already at war, and Earth had to be a part of it, whether they liked it or not. "If we do this," Grace said quietly, looking out the viewport, "we're no longer just Earth. We're part of something much bigger, and we can't back out once we commit." Sharp nodded, understanding the gravity of the choice. "Are we ready, Commander?" Grace looked out at the stars, her heart pounding with the weight of the decision. Humanity had already shown they could survive, but now they had to prove they could thrive. They could no longer afford to hide. They had to stand tall and fight for a place in the galaxy. "We're ready," Grace said, her voice steady. "Let's show them who we are." The decision was made. Humanity was no longer fighting alone, and Earth's fleet was no longer just a ragtag group of ships defending their home. They had entered something much bigger, an alliance with the HFY Dominion. It wasn't just a military pact, it was a statement. Humanity was here to stay, and they would fight to prove they belonged in the galaxy. Grace Wilson stood on the bridge of the Endurance, watching as the stars streaked by. Their fleet was now part of something far larger than any single species. The HFY Dominion had sent reinforcements, ships, weapons, and most importantly, experienced tacticians to guide them. It was the beginning of a new chapter, but Grace could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about fighting for humanity's place in the universe. "Commander," Lieutenant Sharp's voice cut through the quiet, "the HFY have informed us that the QZR fleet is on the move again. They're coming for Earth again." Grace's heart sank. She had known the QZR wouldn't back down so easily. The battle they fought had only been a skirmish in their eyes. Earth wasn't safe. Not yet. But this time they wouldn't be alone. "We need to prepare," Grace said, her voice calm though her mind raced. "Gather the fleet. Make sure our new allies are ready. We need to hit them before they can hit us." "Understood, Commander," Sharp replied. "We've already started deploying our forces." Grace turned toward the tactical display on the wall, watching as the human fleet, now bolstered by HFY ships, moved into formation. It was impressive, the sheer size of their combined forces. But the Qzar had more than just numbers on their side. They had experience, and they had a cruel, unyielding nature that made them dangerous. Hours later, Earth's fleet stood ready, positioned near the edge of their solar system. Grace stood in the center of the war room, studying the holographic projection of the approaching enemy fleet. The Qzar ships were massive, intimidating, and armed with weapons capable of tearing through entire fleets with ease. But the human fleet wasn't the same as before. With the HFY's support, they had better weapons, better tactics, and better morale. "Commander," Sharp spoke again, her tone laced with tension. "We've received their demands. The Qzar want immediate surrender. If we don't comply, they'll destroy Earth." Grace's fists clenched at her sides. "They're not getting Earth, not today." Sharp nodded, understanding the commander's resolve. "We'll hold the line, Commander. We're ready." Grace's mind flashed to the warnings from the Galaxy Council. They had told the galaxy to stay away from humanity. They had said humans were too dangerous, too chaotic, too unpredictable. Now those same people would watch as humanity fought its biggest battle yet. Grace had always believed that the best way to show the galaxy humanity's worth was through actions, not words. And today, she was going to prove that humans were more than just survivors. They were warriors. "Launch all fighters," Grace ordered. "Deploy our tactical teams. We hit them first, hit them hard, and show them we're not backing down." The battle began in a burst of chaos. The Qzar fleet moved swiftly, their ships outnumbering humanity's, but not by as much as they'd hoped. The combined might of the human fleet and the HFY's reinforcements struck like lightning, fast and deadly. Missiles, laser fire, and explosions lit up the dark expanse of space. The Endurance darted through the carnage, its cannons blasting away at enemy ships, while smaller fighters darted in and out of the fray, targeting weak points in the Qzar ship's armor. "Enemy flagship approaching," Lieutenant Sharp called, her eyes glued to the monitors. "It's moving in fast." Grace's gaze snapped to the projection. The Qzar flagship was enormous, a war machine built for destruction. It was the heart of their fleet, and if they took it out, the rest of the Qzar ships would lose their leader. This was their chance to break the Qzar's will. "Focus all fire on the flagship," Grace commanded. "We take that ship, we win this fight." The Endurance and its fleet accelerated toward the enemy flagship. The battle raged around them, but Grace's mind was sharp, focused. Every move, every attack had to count. She could feel the tension in her crew, but they were with her. They believed in this fight. They believed in humanity's right to stand among the stars. The Endurance fired its main cannon, sending a direct hit to the Qzar flagship's shield generator. The flagship staggered, its engines sputtering as it lost power. "We've got them," Sharp shouted, her voice full of excitement. But just as victory seemed within reach, a massive shockwave ripped through the battlefield. The Qzar flagship retaliated, launching a devastating counterstrike that knocked the Endurance off course. The ship shuddered, and alarms blared as they took another hit. "Shields are down, hull integrity at 25%, Sharp reported. Grace gritted her teeth, her face set in determination. "We're not stopping, keep firing." The human fleet surged forward, firing on all cylinders. The smaller ships swarmed the Qzar flagship like bees around a hive, attacking from every angle. Grace knew this was their moment. It was now or never. With one final, coordinated strike, the Endurance launched a full-powered shot directly into the heart of the flagship's reactor. The ship exploded in a fiery blaze, sending shockwaves across the battlefield. The Qzar fleet, now without leadership, began to break apart. "We did it," Sharp breathed, her voice full of disbelief. But Grace wasn't ready to celebrate. Not yet. There were still many battles ahead, and humanity's place in the galaxy was far from secured. "We've won today," Grace said quietly, looking out at the stars. "But the galaxy will remember what happens next. We've shown them what humanity is capable of." The silence after the battle was overwhelming. The stars outside the Endurance flickered calmly, unaffected by the chaos that had just unfolded. The Qzar fleet had been shattered, their flagship reduced to space debris, but Grace Wilson couldn't shake the feeling that the war was far from over. The human fleet had taken heavy losses, fighters lost, ships damaged beyond repair, lives sacrificed. The victory felt hollow with the weight of the casualties still fresh in her mind. The Endurance was battered, its once pristine hull now scarred by battle, but it was still standing, still flying. That was the one thing that mattered. "Commander, the Qzar are retreating," Lieutenant Sharp reported, her voice tense but filled with relief. "They're pulling back to their home system. It looks like they're beaten." Grace stood at the center of the bridge, her gaze fixed on the display. The enemy ships were indeed retreating, but the path to Earth was clear. They had won, but at what cost? "Send a message to the rest of the fleet. Acknowledge the victory, but remind them that the war isn't over. We'll need time to regroup and rebuild," Grace ordered. Sharp nodded and began relaying the command. Grace felt the weight of her position more than ever. This victory had given humanity a chance, but it was also a reminder that the galaxy was still filled with enemies who had no idea what they were up against. The Qzar had underestimated humanity, but other species might not make the same mistake. Later that day, Grace stood in the quiet of her quarters, staring out at the stars. She had always found comfort in the vastness of space, in the way the stars seemed so far away yet so constant. But today, they felt distant, like a reminder of how much was at stake. Her comms buzzed, breaking the silence. "Commander Wilson," a familiar voice said through the speaker. It was General Talloner, the leader of the HFY Dominion. "We've seen the Qzar's defeat. Humanity has proven its strength. The galaxy is watching." Grace's eyes narrowed. She had known the CHR were paying attention, but this was more than she expected. And Talloner's voice was calm, measured. "You've earned the CHR's respect. Our fleets will stand with yours when needed. But understand this, we are allies, not protectors. If your species is to continue on this path, you will need to learn to fight for more than just survival." Grace clenched her fists. "We've already proven we can fight." Talloner paused. "Yes, but can you lead? That will be your true test, Commander Wilson. The Qzar were just one obstacle. The galaxy is not kind to those who rise quickly. You will face challenges you cannot predict. And when those challenges come, you must decide what kind of future humanity will have." The transmission ended abruptly, leaving Grace standing alone in the dark. The words hung heavy in her mind. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about leading, about showing the galaxy that humanity could not only fight but also thrive. The following days were a blur of rebuilding. Earth's fleet was scattered across space, helping the remaining colonies, assisting in repairs and licking their wounds. But the human spirit never faltered. Every loss, every setback only strengthened their resolve. "Commander," Sharp called as she walked into the bridge, her face grim. "We've detected something. A signal from the Qzar, encrypted, but we're decrypting it now." Grace turned from the viewport, her brow furrowing. "What are they saying?" Sharp's fingers flew over the controls. "It's a threat, Commander. The Qzar have declared Earth their enemy. They're assembling a fleet to strike again, this time with more reinforcements." Grace's heart sank. She had known the Qzar wouldn't back down forever. The moment of peace they had earned was brief, and the war was far from over. "Get me the CHR," Grace ordered. "We need to prepare. I want every available ship in position to defend Earth." Sharp hesitated for a moment. "Commander, there's more. The CHR haven't responded to our calls. It seems they've retreated." Grace's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean they've retreated?" "They've pulled back their fleet to their own space. They've made no indication that they'll help us again." The room fell into a heavy silence. Grace took a deep breath, her mind racing. The CHR had helped them win the last battle, but now they were retreating. It was as if they were afraid of getting too involved. Humanity was on their own again. "We can't wait for anyone else," Grace said firmly. "Prepare Earth's fleet. We'll fight this war alone if we have to, but we won't stop." As the days passed, the Qzar fleet continued to build, their numbers swelling as they gathered reinforcements from across the galaxy. Grace knew the battle ahead would be their greatest test yet, but humanity had already shown it could rise when pushed to the brink. They had fought back against impossible odds before, and they would do it again. The final battle began in the silence of space, the stars stretching out before them. Earth's fleet, battered but unbroken, took their positions. Every ship, every fighter, every person on board knew the stakes. Grace stood at the bridge, her fists clenched at her sides. She could hear the sounds of her crew preparing for what was to come. She felt the weight of it all, her people's future, the fate of Earth itself, resting on her shoulders. But she wasn't afraid. They had already fought for survival. Now they would fight for their future. The Qzar may have thought they could crush humanity. They were wrong. The battle for Earth was coming. Grace Wilson stood at the helm of the Endurance, her eyes scanning the tactical map projected in front of her. The Qzar fleet was on the move, and this time they were not holding back. Their forces were massive, a sea of warships and dreadnoughts, a force that threatened to wipe out everything humanity had fought for. The Earth fleet, now bolstered by a few CHR reinforcements, was ready, but only just. Their resources were stretched thin, their ships battered from previous engagements, and their morale tested to the limit. But in the face of this overwhelming threat, humanity had one thing the Qzar did not: a burning desire to protect their home, their people, their future. "Commander," Lieutenant Sharp called from her station, "the Qzar are entering firing range. We'll be in direct contact in under 10 minutes. Grace's heart beat faster. The countdown had begun. She didn't need to be reminded of the stakes. This was it, the last stand. If they didn't win today, Earth could be lost forever. "Status report," Grace ordered. "Shields are holding at 50%, Commander. Our weapons are online, but we can't afford to waste any shots," Sharp replied. "The CHR are standing by, but they're not eager to engage unless we absolutely need them." Grace took a deep breath. The CHR were a powerful ally, but they weren't fully committed. Humanity had to prove that they could stand on their own, that Earth was a force to be reckoned with, not just a victim waiting to be saved. "Understood," Grace said. "We do this our way, no backing down." She turned to face her crew. The faces of the men and women she had come to know, those who had fought beside her, stood behind her. They had given everything to get to this moment. "Everyone, this is it," Grace said, her voice steady. "We've come this far and we're not stopping now. Our families, our friends, Earth, it's all on the line, but we are not going to let it fall. Humanity fights to the last breath. We show the galaxy what we're made of." A cheer rose from the crew, their resolve shining through. They were ready for Earth, for humanity, for each other. The enemy fleet came into full view on the viewscreen. The Qzar warships stretched across the horizon of space, their dark forms like a black storm rolling toward Earth. Massive dreadnoughts led the charge, flanked by smaller cruisers and fighters. The cold, calculating energy of the Qzar radiated from their ships, as if they knew they had the upper hand. They thought humanity was weak, an easy target. Grace's hands tightened on the controls. "Prepare to engage," she said. "Weapons, target their lead dreadnought. All ships follow my lead." The Endurance and the fleet surged forward, racing toward the incoming Qzar. The first shots were fired and the battle erupted in a cacophony of noise. Explosions lit up the dark expanse of space, lighting up the cold void. The Endurance rocked under enemy fire, but they didn't stop. The humans didn't stop. "Focus fire on their shields," Grace shouted over the sound of alarms. We've got one shot at this. The Earth fleet was small compared to the Qzar, but their tactics were quick and precise. They darted in and out of the firestorm, using their agility to their advantage, striking at weak points in the Qzar ships. Every shot from their ships was aimed at a vital target. They weren't wasting ammunition. Each blast was a message. Humanity was not to be underestimated. "Target locked," Lieutenant Sharp shouted, firing. A massive burst of energy shot from the Endurance, hitting the lead Qzar dreadnought head-on. The ship shuddered, and smoke began to billow from its outer hull. The humans had done it. They had struck the heart of the Qzar fleet. But the victory was short-lived. The Qzar retaliated with a powerful wave of fire, overwhelming the Endurance's shields. Grace's heart skipped as another round of blasts hit their ship, throwing the crew from their stations. The Endurance groaned, its hull cracking under the strain. "We're losing power," Sharp yelled. "We're not going to last much longer if we don't do something." Grace's mind raced. They couldn't afford to retreat. Earth couldn't afford to lose. They had to push through. Her eyes locked onto the enemy dreadnought, its massive guns charging for another strike. This was it, their chance to end it. "Lieutenant Sharp," Grace said, her voice a whisper of resolve. "We're going in, all power to forward thrusters. Prepare to ram their flagship." Sharp's eyes widened. "Commander, are you crazy? We'll never make it." "We have no choice," Grace said, determination flooding her veins. "We do this together. On my mark, ram them." The crew hesitated for only a moment, then nodded in silent agreement. They were all in this together. They had always been. "Mark," Grace shouted. The Endurance lurched forward, its engines screaming as they pushed the ship toward the heart of the Qzar fleet. The dreadnought was moments away from firing its massive cannon when the Endurance slammed into its side. The force of the impact shook the ship to its core. Explosions rang out as the Endurance tore through the dreadnought's hull. For a moment, everything went quiet. The Qzar flagship groaned and buckled, its power systems failing as the explosion from the Endurance's final blow sent shockwaves throughout the battlefield. Then, the final detonations went off, and the flagship erupted in a fiery blaze. The Qzar fleet scattered, their leader was gone, their morale shattered. The human fleet had done it. The silence after the explosion was deafening. The Endurance floated in the wreckage, battered but alive. Grace looked at her crew, all of them silent, their faces a mix of exhaustion and disbelief. "We won," Sharp whispered, as if unable to believe it herself. Grace nodded, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, we did. We showed them who we are." And for the first time, humanity's place in the galaxy was no longer uncertain.